Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us for this important discussion on the role of methane abatement in South Africa's climate-compatible development pathway. Specifically, we are looking at coal mine methane. This webinar builds directly on our previous engagement where we explored methane emissions across key sectors, particularly agriculture and waste. One of the key outcomes from that discussion was the need for a much deeper sector-specific conversation, including a discussion on coal mine methane. In South Africa, coal mine methane emissions, whether from underground operations, surface mines, or closed and abandoned mines, remain an area that presents real measurement and data challenges. These emissions are often dilute, diffuse, and fugitive in nature, which makes them difficult to quantify. Our current methodologies reflect these complexities and the inherent uncertainties associated with the estimation of coal mine methane. That said, neither government nor the South African mining industry have been standing still. Important work has already been done to better understand these emissions for national inventory purposes and for corporate reporting. At the same time, recent discussions have raised the question of whether coal mine methane might still represent a climate blind spot in South Africa's broader climate response. Today's dialogue is therefore both timely and necessary. It gives us the opportunity to reflect on practical progress to date, deepen our shared understanding, and consider where our future focus should be. So why does this conversation matter to us, and why is it so important to have the conversation today? Coal remains central to South Africa's energy system and to the economies of several regions. At the same time, we are navigating a just energy transition that must balance climate ambition, economic resilience, energy security, and community livelihoods. So developing a better understanding of coal mine methane emissions can support these priorities. This needs to start with unpacking current monitoring and accounting practices and the realities, challenges, and future opportunities that these present. This lays the foundation for identifying realistic and practical coal mine methane abatement opportunities in the South African context, where it is recognized that unlocking these opportunities is not trivial and will require improved measurement and reporting, enabling regulatory frameworks, technical capacity, bankable project pipelines, and appropriate and accessible finance. So as the facilitator today, I encourage open and constructive dialogue, practical contributions grounded in evidence and experience, a solutions-oriented approach, and clarity on both challenges and opportunities. We are not here to simply diagnose problems, but to advance understanding and identify actionable next steps. We have an excellent lineup of speakers representing a wide spread of constituents. We've got government, academia, industry, and international finance perspectives. So our speakers are Ms. Cindy Mashele from the DFFE. We've got Prof. Brett Cohen from the University of Cape Town. We've got Nikki Fisher, Head of Sustainability, Tungela. We've got Ms. Anuba Gurung, and she's the director of the Nepal program at the Clean Cooking Alliance. She will be on video, but still here to represent. And we've also got Mr. Mohammed Sultan, who is the regional lead at Africa at the Global Methane Hub. And then we've got Lebo Mulaisi, Executive Manager, Research and Policy at the PCC Secretariat. My name is Shamini Harrington, and I am a PCC Commissioner. And I'm really looking forward to the discussions, to have frank and open discussions. I'm going to facilitate the session such that we get through all of the presentations. Please hold your questions, and we will then have an open session that I will facilitate, and we can ask various questions. And I'd like to also really focus us on trying to work out what should the focus be, where should we start, and how should the PCC play a role in unlocking this space. So the first speaker is going to set the scene for us, and I would like to invite now Ms. Cindy to take the floor, well, the virtual floor, And I would like to just say again, thank you once again for joining us, and I look forward to the conversation. So, Cindy, over to you.
Thank you, Shamini, and good morning, everyone. My name is Simbisiwe Mashele. I'm from the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment, specifically within the Climate Change Mitigation Unit. I lead the directorate that's responsible for compiling the country national greenhouse gas emissions inventory. And we are also responsible for managing the greenhouse gas reporting program, where companies are required to account and also report their emissions on an annual basis. I will be presenting on the status of coal methane emissions monitoring and accounting in South Africa, specifically looking at the national emissions inventory perspective and what we are accounting for within the inventory. So first, I would like to introduce this concept, looking at what we are actually covering in terms of these methane emissions within the sector. So the methane and carbon dioxide emissions are released during the extraction and handling, and these are classified as fugitive emissions within the greenhouse gas emissions inventory. It also includes the post-mining emissions, where additional emissions occur during coal processing, storage, and transport, where the residual gases continue to escape from the coal. And the reason that this sector is important from the national inventory perspective is that, given South Africa's reliance on coal for energy production, fugitive emissions from coal mining represent a significant source of emissions within the national emissions inventory. And in terms of the scope and coverage of the inventories that we've published in the past, currently what is included is that the fugitive emissions from coal mining includes fugitive emissions from underground and surface coal mining in South Africa, covering extraction and handling processes. And it also includes post-mining activities. And in this as well, it is also important to separate surface coal mining and underground mining. And the methodology that we use to estimate emissions takes this into account. Underground mining releases significant methane due to pressurized coal seams, whereas surface mining results in relatively low methane emissions. And also, the current inventory excludes emissions from abandoned mines and spontaneous combustions from mines which are no longer operating. And the reason for this is that we do not have sufficient data to include this in the inventory, but it's something that we are exploring, and we want to ensure that we include it in the inventory going forward, to ensure that the inventory represents a complete set of all the sources within the sector. Yeah, can you please move to slide 4? So in terms of the methodological approach that we are applying to estimate these emissions within the national inventory, is that we are applying tier 2 methods, which are country-specific emission factors. And the also important thing to note within the inventory, which is a process that we do for every cycle, we identify key categories that are important to ensure that these emissions accurate going forward, and we implement ongoing improvements. So the coal mining sector is one of these case categories that is included in the inventory. And that is the reason why we're also applying Tier 2 emission factors, which emission factors that represent regional circumstances instead of the default emission factors, which may not be representative of what is actually happening within our region. And also the methodologies distinguish between underground and surface mining, as I've indicated, the distinction is very important because underground mining generates emissions, more emissions compared to surface coal mining. And we need to ensure that within the inventory process, following the IPCC principles, we implement ongoing improvement in terms of how we account for these emissions. Can we go to slide 5? So in terms of the activity data that we use to inform this emissions that we are estimating with this within the inventory, is we use annual coal production figures, which have been historically provided by the Department of Minerals and Energy in their SAMI report. And recently, we have also been using information from the Mineral Council of South Africa. And additionally to this, within the reporting program, companies are required to account for their production as well as the related emissions from this sector. So all this information is used to inform the estimates that we are coming up with within the inventory process. And we also ensure that the data that we are using is disaggregated by surface and underground mining. And later on, I will also go through the trends within the sector so that we can see the importance of the different sources within the sector in terms of the contribution of underground mining within this sector. And we also, to ensure that the trend that we are presenting represents a realistic situation, we use consistent data sources to inform this estimates. Can you go to the next slide? So, what I want to also discuss here is in terms of the rationale for us to apply country-specific emission factors in relation to the IPCC defaults, which are a bit higher, is that what we have seen is that the IPCC default methane emission factors, they overestimate the emissions due to the differing coal seam contents within South Africa. And that is the reason that national or country-specific emission factors were developed to ensure that we, as I've indicated, we present information that is regionally relevant instead of using IPCC defaults, which may not actually represent the country situation. And also, the benefits of using country-specific emission factors is that it reduces the uncertainty in the estimates that we are producing, because there'll always be a level of uncertainty in estimates that are produced. But what we want to ensure is that we reduce this uncertainty over time. Go to the next slide. And the country-specific emission factors that we are using, it's from a study which was done by Coltech, and it included sampling of methane concentrations from different sites. and within the country, which is why it's more country relevant. And there was a model that was then developed to model the emissions from underground surface coal mining and post-mining emissions. And what we have seen is that this has improved the emissions estimates that we are producing, because compared to the default emission factors, the emission factors within the country are slightly lower compared to the IPCC defaults. Can we go to the next slide? So this graph shows the current emissions trends within the coal mining sector in terms of the methane emissions, specifically methane emissions, and focusing more on the coal mining rather than the whole sector of the whole subsector of fugitive emissions, which includes solid fuels transformation. And what we have seen is that on average, this sector is contributing about 1.2 million tons of CO2 equivalent, which is 1.2 gigagrams of CO2 equivalent. If you look at this in the national context, it's about 2% of the total methane emissions at national level. And as we have seen is that the agriculture sector is the sector that contributes more towards methane emissions compared to the coal mining sector. But this does not diminish the importance of this sector, considering that we are a country that is dependent on power that is generated from coal. So the downstream emissions that the sector is contributing to is quite significant if you look at the whole value chain. So it is important that we look at these emissions and we come up with mitigation strategies to reduce these emissions over time. Can go to the next slide. So I think one of the key messages you can take from this presentation is that coal mining and handling are primary sources of fugitive emissions within the country, and it requires a detailed methodological focus in ensuring that we accurately represent these emissions over time, given the nature of these emissions as introduced by the facilitator of this webinar, to say that since these emissions are fugitive in nature, it's difficult to really account for them and ensure that we are actually representing the true situation of what is happening in the ground. And that's why it's important that we continue the studies that are being done by the sector and by government in ensuring that we update our country-specific parameters, and we use consistent methodology to estimate these emissions over time. And we are improving the accuracy of these emissions, and we are also aligned in terms of the international reporting requirements that are placed on the country in terms of the UNFCCC obligations. We can go to the next slide. I think it is also important to note the key emerging issues in terms of accounting of emissions, of fugitive emissions in general. And what we have noted from the media and other studies as well is that the satellite data observations often conflict with bottom-up inventories. And we are looking at improving this data, looking at the data from satellite observations, and these are studies that we want to do based on available funding as a department to ensure that since these emissions are fugitive in nature, the satellite observations can assist us to fill the gap between what is seen in satellite observations versus what is seen in emissions inventory. But we are cautiously approaching this issue of using satellite observation as it has been said in other publications as well, that there's large uncertainties in terms of the satellite emissions estimates when compared to ground truth experiments. But this is something that we want to explore as a department to ensure that we can verify the information that we are getting from companies, and we are improving the accounting and reporting of this estimates over time. I think this is where I'd like to end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cindy, and absolutely agree. I think you've nicely summed up some of the key issues that we need to talk about today is the estimation, the uncertainties that exist, and what is the way forward and how do we tackle that? And I'd like to open that conversation up in the Q&A. But thank you, Cindy, for setting that scene. I do note there is one question that popped up, and perhaps, Cindy, I can ask you very quickly. Victor Manik asked, do we include dumps, I believe it was in the chat, in our inventory numbers? I recall that you said no, it was not included. Is that correct?
So there is an emission pattern which covers the whole handling and processing component, but it doesn't specifically focus on dumps. So
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, I think that's clear. Thanks I thought let's not just forget about that question. It might get lost because it was so early on. So thank you, Cindy, for coming through on that. With that, I would like to request the audience to also pop some of these clarification questions into the chat. I'm happy to just field them very quickly as the presenters are going through, because I don't want us to lose this. I mean, it's clarifying questions that are important to set the scene. So let's actually tackle them as the presenters are going through. But the more detailed, substantive discussions, let's hold it for the Q&A session that's coming a little bit later on. With that, can I now invite Brett, if you can pull up your presentation, and you're going to take us through this latest piece of work that you've done, you and a few others. So please take us through the latest work on coal mine methane. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Shamini, and good morning to all the listeners. So just to confirm, Shamini, that you can see my screen, that we're not having any tech issues. Okay,
yeah,
great.
100%, and we can hear you loud and clear. Thanks, Brett.
Thank you very much. So I just want to give you a very brief overview of a study that was completed in around September last year, where we sought to explore the coal mine methane question in South Africa. So really to have a look at what's going on here. So just before I go into the specific research questions which we addressed in the study, it was conducted at the University of Cape Town in the Minerals to Metals group in partnership with Swaneti Global. That is a policy and research organization that does a lot of work in the global south. And my co-authors are listed on the front cover of this particular report. So the study set out to really do a high-level scoping on what is going on with respect to coal mine methane emissions in South Africa, in recognition that there's not a lot of coherent data available, both in terms of the emissions themselves and in terms of the mitigation opportunities. So we set ourselves 6 key questions. We said, let's have a look at what's going on in terms of the emissions data, what is happening in the policy space with respect to both emissions reporting and mitigation. What kinds of mitigation opportunities are there out there for mitigating coal mine methane, and what might be some of the challenges in implementing those mitigation measures? We were asked by our funders, who are also on the call, to have a look at what links there might be to the JET, and then finally to make a set of policy recommendations in moving sort of action in this area forward. And it needs to be highlighted that the information was largely drawn from publicly available literature, so academic journals, research reports, company reports, both globally and locally. And then we also held a stakeholder engagement workshop during the course of last year, and some of the panelists were participants in our workshop as well. So I'm going to run through some of the results that we found very quickly. I recognize time is limited, and then we'll be very happy to unpack any questions you might have as we go along. And really, with respect to the first question as to what is going on with the emissions data in South Africa, I think Cindy has covered the space fairly well. So I won't focus too much on what we found here. But I think maybe just to highlight that the data that we have available to us in the public domain, the official data is limited to what's contained in the inventory. And the inventory figures are given as the first two bars on the chart on the right-hand side of the screen, an earlier inventory and then our latest inventory. But then there is also the satellite information that Cindy has spoken about as well, which is collected, as generic data by satellites scanning the planet for sources of information. And a lot of this information looks at what plumes of information there is, both from active mines, but also from abandoned mines and from spontaneous combustion. So the satellite data is perhaps more comprehensive in terms of its coverage than our inventory data. Cindy's already mentioned this, but it is limited in terms of some of the challenges around measurement. So there are issues around spatial and temporal resolution, and there are various environmental conditions that can impact on the measurements that are taken. So I think one has to be look at various limitations of the different measurement approaches in trying to understand what is the scope of emissions from South Africa. And perhaps the reality sits somewhere in between. So I think we can speak about that during the discussion sessions. And what this really pointed to as part of our study was the need for improving our full understanding of the of what emissions are in South Africa. So the data accuracy, the coverage, and for this we will need to maybe go down to more mine-specific emission factors. Cindy's already mentioned, in the inventory, we distinguish between underground and surface mines. But in fact, underground mines of similar sizes can have vastly different emissions. So we need to really increase the level of specificity on our mine measurements. We need to do some on-site measurement as well, and then work on progressing the integration of the remote sensing data from satellites with the measured data. So then we had a look in our study at the policies landscape in South Africa. So many of you will be familiar with the National Greenhouse Gas Emissions Reporting Regulations, under which high emitters in certain categories and all emitters in other categories need to submit emissions data to the greenhouse gas registry system, or the record system called SAGES. And that information is being submitted by many of the mining houses. However, we need to recognize that for various confidentiality reasons, that data is not made public. So at this stage, we can't use that data as a triangulation point for the data that I put on the previous slide. Although, having said that, some of the big mining houses do report their coal mine methane data, but not consistently is what we found, and many of the junior miners don't report this information. So although that information is being collected in terms of the policy requirements, it's not possible to pull together a full picture from that data. And then, of course, as I mentioned in the previous slide, the reporting information does not cover abandoned mines, spontaneous combustion, and post mining coal handling. I probably not agree with that, actually. I probably take back on that, but certainly abandoned mines is not covered by the reporting requirements. There is also some policy fragmentation. So although reporting does fall under the gamut of the DFFE, as we've heard from Cindy. We don't see there being significant policy alignment in terms of emissions and mitigation between DMPR, DFFE, and DEE. And what this leads to is that there's no, cohesive strategy in South Africa in terms of methane measurement and mitigation. And then a final point to note here in the sort of broader policy landscape arena is that coal mine methane is not explicitly addressed in the JET IP. So we see some policy attention given, and perhaps a further note here is that coal mine methane is covered by the carbon tax, but there's not a cohesive set of policy interventions in the country. So then we had a look at what kinds of opportunities there are for mitigating coal mine methane. So having a look at international suggestions, there is an indication that up to 90% of coal mine methane in operating mines could be abated at fairly reasonable costs, and in some cases at no costs. So the sort of band of cost figure that's given is around $20 per ton of CO2 equivalents. And there are a number of existing technologies that can be immediately employed for mitigation of methane from coal mines. And some examples here are, first of all, removing the methane from coal seams prior to mining, so pre-drainage, and then flaring of your methane, or even energy recovery if your concentrations are high enough. So that's even before you start mining. Then there's the option of, as I said, flaring of your methane, so really just burning methane that is collected to generate CO2, which has a much lower global warming potential. Then if there are the concentrations of methane in the gas that you collect, there's the possibility of utilization for power generation, but that is not a universally applicable technology. It's only where you have the flows of methane that are suited to power generation. And finally, the collection of your ventilation air, methane, and then getting rid of it in some way, so through flaring or power generation. The advantage of some of the ventilation air methane opportunities is that they can actually deal with low concentration of methane, but they are expensive to implement. So there's a range of technologies that are available on the international front, but not really significant experience in South Africa with implementation of mitigation technologies. So our studies suggested that there might be opportunities for mitigation at a small number of high emitting mines, and that could possibly be done cost effectively, but there isn't the data to be able to state that conclusively. And we also suggested that if one does have to go ahead with coal mine methane mitigation, there could be various co-benefits that could be leveraged through improving mine safety, because methane could potentially present an explosion risk, and also air quality risks. There are opportunities for lowering air pollution and doing some productive applications of the methane. So while there are these mitigation opportunities and others are available to us, there are several systematic barriers to mitigation that we identified. The first one I've already alluded to is that not all mines emit methane in concentrations suitable for capture or utilization. So if the methane in the streams that are coming off the mines is too dilute, it makes it very difficult to mitigate them, or expensive to mitigate them. We sometimes see that emissions are not consistent, or they're intermittent, they're diffuse, and then that all leads to them being below economic thresholds to manage. The second point is a link to a point that I made earlier. There is a lack of reliable real-time monitoring infrastructure, which makes project planning and risk assessment of mitigation projects challenging. There's the need for high upfront capital investments, and where there is a revenue stream that is built into the financial case for mitigation, this depends on some sort of long-term revenue certainty. And Nikki might talk, I'm not sure, to some of the experiences that they've had already with projects in South Africa. I've already suggested that there's an absence of a lead agency that has taken responsibility for governance of coal mine methane. And then finally, there's a lack of public funding instruments to help with de-risking early stage projects. So yeah, a number of barriers that need to be addressed to help support mitigation of methane in the country. We also then had a look at sort of links to the just energy transition. And we tried to make suggestions of where there could be links between coal mine methane mitigation and the just transition. And while we didn't come up with anything conclusive because of the fact that we don't yet know the scale of the problem and the potential for mitigation, we did suggest that addressing coal mine methane might provide an opportunity for attracting additional financial resources to help support the just transition and possibly generate some economic activity in vulnerable regions, which are the source of much of these emissions. There could be some health co-benefits, which ties into the just transition from improved air quality and reduced exposure to emissions. Obviously, there's also the climate change benefit and possibly some energy system benefits. Tackling methane on abandoned mines could contribute to a broader program of abandoned mine management to help improve safety and reduce pollution and perhaps find alternative uses for the land. And then finally, if there is a possibility of rollout of new technologies, there could be a potential for technical engineering and engineering job creation and some employment for displaced workers. But again, these are hypothetical opportunities for linking to the just transition, and it will depend on the scale of intervention. This isn't going to be the silver bullet, I don't think, for addressing a just transition in particularly vulnerable areas. So we concluded the study with making a set of policy-related recommendations, which are linked to the findings that I've very briefly presented to you today. There's obviously the opportunity for improved measurement and reporting, so very much building on what Cindy said around trying to triangulate on-site measurements and satellite data, reporting data to try and get better insights into the scale of the problem. And that links to the second point about aligning coal mine methane and climate policy, not only in terms of just getting a better sense of the data and then possibly building both coal mine methane and abandoned mine methane into the sets. There is obviously the need for market and financial support for mitigation projects. So to have a look at various opportunities there for addressing methane where relevant and appropriate. There is addressing methane in mine closure policies, so integrating abandoned mine methane management into the planning for closure of coal mines. There are making links to the JET, as I've outlined already, but only where appropriate. And then a final point came into having a look at what's being done elsewhere. So to see that if there are opportunities for South-South cooperation and technology transfer to help build our action on coal mine methane in South Africa. And there we already implemented some conversations with people from India and perhaps look at other areas where they are facing similar problems to what we are, similar challenges to where we are. So Shamini, I'm going to stop there. A very brief whistle-stop tour through our report, which is available in the public domain.
Thank you so much, Brett. Very interesting, and I think very much linked to what Cindy has been saying and just elaborating a little bit more about the complexities. But thank you for sharing your insights. I just got a question for you. I think we need to be a little bit clearer on what we mean by data is not public. If you can maybe just elaborate, that question came up and I also don't want to lose it. Just to the audience, please put your questions in the Q&A so I can go to one place and lift this. I'm kind of now trying to traverse both of these chats and Q&As. It's becoming a bit of an issue. But Brett, maybe you can allude to what you mean by data is not public, because we do have a category for coal mine methane or fugitive emissions. So that data is there, but it's not disaggregated. Am I correct?
Sorry, are you talking about we have a category that's in the inventory?
Yes.
But company level data that's reported in terms of
Yes.
national reporting regulations is not made public. So
100%.
one can't actually access that. So if that was available one could more easily triangulate the inventory data, the satellite data, with what companies are collecting on the ground. And as I mentioned,
100%.
Shamini, there are a number of our colleagues in companies that are reporting very transparently in their annual reports, but it's not across the board. So that's why we're not able to collate that. Can I respond to one of those specific questions?
Yes, please go for it.
Is the $20 per ton CO2 is based on global averages. We don't have data in South Africa on the cost of implementation of mitigation technologies.
No, thanks for that, Brett. I think it's important that we clarify some of these statements up front, because it's not that the data is not there. We have it at an aggregated. You just aren't able to see company specific. And it does take a little bit of effort to now go through each and every report of a company to be able to gather that information. But if they're aligned with TCFD or even ISSB, which is the new reporting requirements, you will see most companies are actually reporting this data. And there was another question that actually came up, and I thought it's important to make mention of the fact that most companies that are reporting, at least the very big ones that are part of the regulated process on inventories, are verifying their data. Cindy has kindly put into the chat that this data is going through verification at their level as regulated companies. Companies have to also do this of their own volition, where they do third-party audits. So this data is undergoing quite a rigorous review. Depending on the emission factors, we have to understand there are uncertainties. And this is what you were talking about, Brett, as well as Cindy. All right, thank you for that, Brett. With that, I'd like to now take us a little bit step further and really start diving into what are companies doing. So Nikki Fisher from Tungela is going to take us through some of the strides they've made, because there has been a lot of work at industry level. We're fully aware of the challenges on measurement, but there are also challenges even with trying to progress. So Nikki, if you can come and shed some light what Tungela is doing and kind of the strides you've made on mitigation, because there's been some really interesting work that you've done. Thanks, Nikki. Over to you. Nikki, you're on mute. Sorry. There we go.
Okay, all right, there we go. Thanks, Shamini. Right, morning, everybody. All right, so what I'm going to do today is just try to take you through a little bit. We've heard from Cindy and from Brett about sort of a bigger picture. I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about the actual on-the-ground measurements that we're doing and some of the mitigation options that we have or that we've tried. And I think the important place for us to start is, what is coal mine methane and where does it come from? And I think in listening to the conversation, I think we sometimes can confound what coal mine methane is and how we mitigate that with spontaneous combustion, which is a lot more temporal and diffuse and more difficult to measure. So in terms of coal mine methane, when in the process where coal is developing, that methane, while those plants were rotting in those watery bogs covered by sedimentation, the methane is generated by the rotting of that plant matter. And then depending on how much sedimentation you get above those layers, that would depend on how much pressure there was and then the quality of the coal that you get. So you get deep coal mines, you get shallow coal mines. The level of methane in mines also depends on the sedimentary layers above that coal. So some of them are, it would be the same as you get in carbon capture and storage. So some have a poor sealing quality and the methane is able to escape through those sedimentary layers. Others would seal it in quite tightly and then you'd get a high methane content in that coal. In the coal fields that we're mining in South Africa, those are generally very shallow. We get a lot of outcropping. They've been exposed to significant weathering. And so to a large extent, a lot of that methane has already vented into the atmosphere. And so, over geological time, it's not recent, it's geological time. However, there is still methane in the coal. And through the processes of drilling, blasting, cutting underground, that methane is then released. It's under pressure in the coal, it gets released into the atmosphere. What's important is that methane becomes explosive when you reach concentrations of 5 to 15% in the atmosphere, which obviously is a massive risk to people working underground. And so a lot of what has been implemented in terms of methane is for safety measures. So some of the methane mitigation options that we see were developed around initially around safety, and they've now become more about methane mitigation as well. So looking at the actual content of methane content in South African coals, obviously, because I'm from Thungela, I'm going to speak specifically about the Thungela mines, but I know we've got Alan Cook on the line, and he was responsible for doing a lot of the work and for developing the tier 2 emission factor that Cindy was talking about earlier. And this is a chart that gets updated, I think, twice a year. Alan updates this chart. And each mine is required to physically measure the seam gas content of methane in our coal on an annual basis. So we've got 4 underground mines currently, and the average coal, the average 10-year average seam gas content, and we measure it in meters cubed per ton of coal, is around 0.2 meters cubed. Okay. The Thungela mines are sitting way below the sort of 10-year low gas average, and our most recent measurements, we had 0.01 to 0.03. One of our mines, the measurements were too low to measure. So we have very, very low seam gas content in our mines. I'd also like to just bring your attention to the purple lines over on the right-hand side. Those are the higher seam gas content. And if you have a look at the scale of the chart, it goes up to about 1 meter cubed per ton of coal. Okay, so the next slide, are you still able to all hear me? I just want to check. I just saw something coming up on my screen. So these are the emission factors, the tier 2 emission factors. They're a lot lower than what the global emission factors are. Thank you for the confirmation. They're a lot lower, and as Cindy mentioned earlier, open cast coal mines have an emission factor of 0. That methane is assumed to already have entered, for the reasons I mentioned earlier. So we use these factors to report to DFFE, as well as in our annual reporting, and we do disclose the methane and the CO2 equivalent in our reports. As Thungela, what we've been working on for a number of years is we've actually been looking at continuous methane monitors on our operations, on our ventilation shafts. It has been quite a tedious process. It's something that's done as a matter of course in other regions with higher gas content, but in South Africa there's very limited technology and there's very limited skills. It is a scarce skill. The technology we're using comes from Germany, and there are only 1 or 2 people in the country who are able to maintain and calibrate these machines. And even so, we are still battling to get data with the data reliability and accuracy that would be required by DFFE. So we are working with DFFE on this, and we hope to present some data to them later in the year. But our initial results showed that based on what we're getting from the continuous methane monitors, we are overestimating what we are reporting to DFFE and publicly. And that obviously has implications because we pay tax on the fugitive emissions. All right, so now I'm going to take a slightly more global view, and I'm using the Australian example because this is where a lot of the mitigation technologies are used. And what I want to point out here, so this is the coal mine methane content in Australian mines. So number 1, the scale of their graph here goes up to 25 cubic meters per ton of coal. Okay, ours went up to 1. The second thing I'd like to show you is the depth of the mining here. Their mines can go up to almost 500 meters deep. Our coal mines are less than 100, definitely some around 50, most around 50. And so this small dot here is where the South African, probably even a little bit lower, that's where South African mines are sitting. So a lot of these mines are implementing coal mine pre-drainage and flaring, etc., which I'll discuss in a minute. But the minimum seam gas content that you need in order to be able to do that effectively is 6 cubic meters per ton of coal. So it would be the mine sort of above the 5-meter line there, 5 cubic meter line. So Brett showed a similar picture, and really what this involves, and it would have stemmed from needing to pre-drain the methane ahead of mining so that the methane concentrations underground were at a safe level for people to be there. It is a huge explosive risk, and there have been a number of incidents where multiple fatalities have occurred because of methane explosions. And so what they do is they drill into the coal, and then either through the sort of natural pressure, the methane will release, or they sometimes will pump that. That methane then gets extracted through pipelines and flared, either flared or in some cases they use it to generate electricity, which is very effective, and it's been done really well in Australia. So we looked at this, and so Thungela was spun out of Anglo American in 2021. We used to be part of Anglo American, and I've been with the company for 15 years. So I'm going to speak about a project that was done under the auspices of Anglo. It's now owned by Seriti. It's no longer our mine, but I just want to take you back. When we spoke about 6 meters cube per ton, we're looking at 1 cubic meter per ton. And the mine that we tried this project at was New Denmark, which sits over here. It's now at about 0.3 cubic meters per ton. It used to be at about 1. Okay, so this was around 2010. We decided to look at what technologies could be employed to try and mitigate some more of the methane from the coal mining, and this was for climate mitigation purposes. And so what we did, the technology that we used, they were enclosed flares, mobile flares that we would move along with drill holes ahead of the mining, release that methane, and then they'd go into these closed chambers, and we would then burn that gas. And that worked well for a while. And then in 2013, we got to a point where for 4 months of the year, the gas concentrations were too low to run the flare. The flare needed a certain level of concentration, otherwise it won't work. The following year, the flare only worked for 4 months of the year. So for 8 months of the year, we weren't able to flare. And by 2015, it just was uneconomic for us to keep moving this flare. I think it flared maybe for a month, and that was that. So the project was then closed. And I think it's a good demonstration that, we have tried. And I think you see that a lot of the mines have this lower mean coal seam methane content. And so, unfortunately, this project didn't work. What happens in the coal mines as well? So obviously, the pre-draining would remove some of the methane, and in the South African context, we don't actually need to do that pre-draining because the methane levels are lower. However, we still do need to ventilate. So you get the ventilation where they're pulling in air from above ground, and they push that through the mine, and then it comes out through a ventilation shaft. And this is a picture of a ventilation shaft. So they are very large structures, and there's a large volume of air moving through these structures as well. And so there has been some work done around ventilation air mitigation, vent air methane mitigation. The most successful has been what we call regenerative thermal oxidizers, and they've been used in the US and China. They require, in order to work effectively, a concentration of between 0.2 to 1.2% methane. In South Africa, at our mines, our concentration of methane in our ventilation air methane is 0.005 to 0.025% at the most. So we're an order of magnitude lower than what's required to be able to use this technology. Another issue that there has been around this technology is the use of is safety. Sorry, it's hasn't been used in Australia. So even though it's been used in the US and China, the Australian mining government department hasn't allowed this technology to be used because of the safety implications. There are other technologies that are still being trialed and piloted. So there are enrichment technologies where they use adsorption or membranes. The flow rate, the ventilation air flow rate, as I said, there's a lot of air moving through these ventilation shafts, and sometimes that's too much for this technology. It's also very expensive. And then there's catalytic oxidation. Again, this is something, the catalyst cost is really high. There's poisoning risks, and they sort of at least 3 to 10 years away from sort of demonstration scale. We're starting to scale it up. So we are quite limited in South Africa in terms of what we can do to mitigate the methane that we're generating from our mines. I'm going to end there, I think, and then happy to continue the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Nikki. Very interesting, and definitely some sort of work that has been done around what can and cannot be done. As you can see, the challenges are quite big. It's largely related to the concentration of the methane. And the fact that ours is so low makes it very challenging to do what others are doing and to have that as a benchmark, because it's not correct for us. We're going to have to now do internal work, right? First, getting the baseline right, knowing what you are measuring, and then trying to do something about it. Okay, thanks for that. I think with that, Nikki, it's, we've set the scene really well. We've taken a much broader view, what's out there, what inventory data exists, what the challenges are. We've looked specific now at industry, right? Now we want to take it even further. There are some serious challenges around the financing of this. If we're going to do anything more, we're talking about expensive outlay of money. So we just wanted to bring in a perspective around financing. Mr. Mohammed Sultan, who we wanted to come in to do a bit of a presentation for us, is unable to make it, but we do have Mr. Nuba Gurang, and she has done a video for us. So let's actually go to that, and then thereafter we can open up for the Q&A. We've got lots of questions in the chat, and I'd like to invite people to actually take the floor and have a conversation with us, so it becomes a little bit of a dialogue. So with that, Bridget, can I maybe ask for you to pull the video up? All right, I think we need to start from the beginning. There we go. There's no sound that's coming through, Bridget.
I want to start by thanking the Presidential Climate Commission for convening this key engagement on coal mine methane mitigation and its role in South Africa's climate-compatible development pathway. As we all know, the Global Methane Pledge aims to collectively reduce methane emission to help keep the 1.5 degrees centigrade warming target within reach, and South Africa is one of the original signatories in 2021 to this pledge. Ensuring we have methane mitigation from the coal sector is key to meeting this pledge. And today, through this short presentation, I want to bring some key work we see globally when it comes to coal mine methane mitigation. So to begin with, in China, the National Methane Action Plan identifies coal mine methane recovery and utilization as a key priority for the energy sector. Since its release, subnational action plans have been released to work on coal mine methane. China also lowered its coal mine methane emission standards from 30 to 8%, followed by release of China Certified Emission Reduction, or CCER, such that carbon credits can be generated for emissions avoided. CCER thus provides the financial mechanism necessary to help incentivize mitigation, particularly when it comes to VAM. So in China, if we were able to apply the CMM standards that went from 30 to 8%, and CCER, this will lead to almost 52% reduction in coal mine methane emissions from China. We also see in Australia, we have the safeguard mechanisms, which provides opportunity from the cap and trade model and provides potential policy options for methane mitigation. Additionally, we also see a lot of good work coming from Australia on development of robust MRV practices. Starting in 2030, the EU methane regulation will require coal placed on the EU market to comply with specific methane intensity threshold, which means that it will require many countries that will be exporting coal to EU to think seriously about the methane emissions from the coal mines. We also now see programs like the Fossil Fuel Regulatory Program by CCAC or the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, which will be supporting up to 20 developing country governments with tailored support for capacity development, regulatory frameworks, and enforced compliance with existing frameworks, and will be including coal. Through FFRP, CCAC has already initiated working on the coal sector with Kazakhstan. Overall, based on some of the key work that we see in various countries, we see very clearly that a holistic approach is needed to ensure that we have a sustainable methane reduction from the coal mine sector. Data and research is needed to build targeted policies. We already have technologies like RTOs present to mitigate that, but we need policies to ensure the scaling of RTOs. We need incentives for mitigations. We need mobilization of financial resources. We also need collaboration between public and private sectors such that we can sustainably and effectively accelerate and move from emission reduction pledges to tangible reduction from the coal sector when it comes to methane. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And once again, thank you to the President of Climate Commission. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Bridget, for airing that. And thank you to Anuba in her absence. With that, it brings us to the end of all of our presentations. I think we've gotten a really good lay of the land. I'd like to now open up to some dialogue with the presenters as well as now with the audience. So perhaps I can ask each of the presenters to put their camera on and we can then start taking some questions. We've got a few in the Q&A and I know you've started answering a few of them directly, but I think there's a few that remain unanswered. Now, I wonder, we've got from Michelle Mbali, who says that, I think it's more of a statement rather than anything else, that the NDC is unjust because of the lack of methane data in the NDC, which I do not believe to be the case. The NDC is looking at carbon dioxide equivalents. I just want to bring Cindy in to just ask the question of Cindy, because can we confirm that in fact the NDC is taking into account the full inventory, which does have fugitive emissions in it, and it does include CO2e, which means carbon dioxide equivalent, which means we've taken the methane emissions and converted it into a CO2 normalization. Correct, Cindy?
Yes, thanks, Shamini. That is correct. The modeling that was done for the NDC was based on the information from the inventory, which includes methane emissions.
Yeah. Anyone else want to maybe add anything to that, Brett or Nikki? Please feel free, jump in. I'm just targeting where we can, sort of get the best response. But I really want you all to have a conversation come in as well. We've got another question. Yeah, do you want to add something?
I think sort of maybe the statement that it's unjust because of the lack of methane, monitoring mechanism. I mean, as Cindy put up, it is only 2% of the current inventory. We recognize there might be some limitations, but I think it needs to be recognized that as it's quantified now, it's a relatively small contributor, which doesn't mean we shouldn't take action on it.
No, 100%. And I think that's exactly what we've got to ask ourselves here is how do we actually take action on this? What type of action would be cost effective given the challenges we face? That's the other thing. And where do you start, right, Brett? Do we start looking at the baseline of emissions data and how do you include these other sources if it's feasible to do so? So those are some of the questions we want to tackle here. So team, audience, let's actually start pulling in some people. I think, Bridget, if we can, I'd like to get some voices onto the floor. So people, if you can pick up your hands, or how do we do this, Bridget? Please help me. If you can maybe just come online to tell me how we can bring people into the floor. I feel like I'm talking to myself. I'm sure the panelists feel the same.
Understood, Shamini. Tabitha, do you want to say something?
Yes, people can raise their hands and we can recognize them and allow them to ask questions.
Okay, good stuff. We've got Michelle Mbali. So the question here is, does the research presentation consider climate legislation? Michelle, do you want to maybe take the floor?
Yes. That's Clement Mepudi from Grassroots for Climate Action. Thanks for the nice topic for abatement of methane. I understand that the abatement of methane is reducing or removal of this methane, but it seems as if you're concentrating on the coal mine area, but the methane is not released only from the coal mine area. And the other thing is that there is natural source like wetlands, they release methane. Also, we've got the human activities that we're talking about, the coal mining and also agriculture. But now it seems as if for us as South Africans, we're going to have a problem because methane is more than carbon, which emits more of the ozone layer. But for us, I wanted to say it is unjust for us as grassroots communities because all the landfills and all the mines are located around and near the grassroots and the black areas. But now, which means, and it's taking slow to rehabilitate and close the mines because they are abandoned, they are zamazamas, they are abandoned mines which produce and emit a lot of methane. We need just a solution that will be fair for the communities because now the methane is as if it's not a danger for us, but it's dangerous for our health, and also we experience it every day. We say from the government, the strategic methane which was introduced next year, it must also include all the methane pollution. Thanks.
Thanks for that. And I think absolutely understood. I mean, there's obviously challenges with derelict ownerless mines. There's problems with illegal mining. This is something that's being tackled from all fronts. What we're specifically focusing here is on coal mine methane, but of course there's other sources. We've had a webinar with the PCC on agriculture. So there's definitely focus even within the departments, not even just the DFFE, that's looking at this. The Department of Mineral and Petroleum Resources has got a whole program dedicated to DNO sites. There's obviously a challenge about baseline data. Methane is not top of the list. Safety is a big issue. We're trying to close off those sites. We're trying to rehabilitate those sites, and that work is ongoing. But I think not the focus for today, but I do hear you loud and clear. This has to be dealt with, and I think it's fully acknowledged even within the mining companies and the kind of efforts that they are doing themselves on their own. But I don't know, Nikki, I can see you nodding. Is there anything you want to maybe add to that?
Yeah, Shami, I think adding to that and then to Richard Worthington's question around employment opportunities, around rehabilitation, etc. I think in terms of coal mine methane mitigation, the employment opportunities at this point, given where we are, I think it's more research that needs to happen and seeing if there is anything to do at these low concentrations. I think the other issue around spontaneous combustion, which gets confounded with coal mine methane, and that's where the rehab areas and the abandoned mines become an issue, because that's where you've got that SponCom and potential sources of emissions there. And again, it's those are unsafe areas. And so I know for certain, you know, we tackling some of those areas. You've got to go in, you've got to collapse them, you've got to make safe, you've got to do all sorts of things to do that. But, you know, Richard, I think that there's a lot of opportunity for economic diversification in the coal mining region. We're at the end of economic life. There's a lot of land available, there are resources available, there's water, which, you know, with fit for purpose treatment is available. And so I do think that there are a lot of opportunities there. It just might not be in the coal mine methane abatement area. Thanks.
So maybe just to add to that, Nikki, I think thanks for prompting me. I mean, the work of the B20, right? There's a whole legacy project related to post-successive economies on all coal mined land, looking at the abandoned mines. Are there opportunities to revitalize economies around this, create jobs? What could that look like? You know, so of course you have to look at the abatement and dealing with those rehabilitation requirements, as was mentioned by Mitchell. So all of these things are part of that. And there's a whole task team that's looking at this. So there's various pockets. I mean, I had a meeting with the GIZ. They have a whole fund that's now looking at derelict ownerless mines. How can we look at critical minerals, post-successive economies? So I think there's a lot of attention to it. It's now getting into implementation. I think that's lacking. So we need to start pushing on that. And I hope this year is going to see some of that. Richard, I don't know, since Nikki has brought this up, if you want to maybe take the floor, if there's anything further you want to ask on this point.
No, I'm good. Thanks very much for that.
right.
Useful. That's fine for now. Thanks.
All right, happiness. Thanks, Richard. Let me go back to the chat. Anybody else with their hand up, Richard, that wants the floor?
Yes, we have Margaret Mukoka. Margaret, you
Okay.
can come through.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. My name is Margaret Mukoka. I'm staying in Lephalale in Limpopo, where we have a coal mine and we have 2 power stations, Medupi and Matimba. So through the presentation and the questions that were asked about the report of the data capture, is it possible for the public? So the response, I felt so disappointed because we as grassroots level, we are the ones, at the community level, we are the ones who are impacted by the emission standard that is coming out of the power stations and the mines. So my concern or my question isn't it not going to be possible for us as communities to be part of the reporting or part of the data capture that is being reported? How can we be involved to be part of that? Because we are so concerned and we are so keen to be more involved in participating of the report that is coming back of the coal mines because of the impact that is happening around our communities. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Margaret. So I think, Margaret, we must be clear and differentiate between air quality emissions and what we are talking about here in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, which cause global warming, which is more at a global level and it causes warming of the earth. In terms of data, I absolutely agree. How do we make this available? And I do believe Cindy has responded, but perhaps we can ask Cindy to come back online, but I don't see her here. She seems to have dropped off. Cindy, are you still online? Oh, there we go. Cindy, can you just provide your response on what we're trying to do now, getting back to IPCC codes and getting more granular data?
Yes. So we're in the process of implementing a new reporting system, and there has been a call in previous inventories that we have published for public comment to improve the transparency of the information that we are publishing. And we have noted that call, and we are in the process of trying to improve the transparency of the information. So in the new reporting system, the information reported by companies will be available to the public at an IPCC code level. And that is only emissions data so that we don't compromise the confidentiality of the information that will be submitted by companies.
Okay, thanks for that, Cindy. It's definitely progress in terms of getting more granular data. And then one could then separate out post-mining, spontaneous combustion, because those will have separate IPCC codes. Am I correct in that? I mean, of course, you need the data but at least it will be separated, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good stuff. Thank you. We've got now two hands. I wonder, Becky, are you up next, or is it Nshla Kanipo?
Yeah, it's Takanipo Mansulu. You can go through.
All right, thank you. Nshla Kanipo, can you unmute? If you're talking, we can't hear you.
Maybe while he's still fixed. Oh, he's
Yeah.
through.
Oh, he's through. Yeah, there we go. Nshla Kanipo, can you hear us? All right, so let's actually come back. Ipfi, if you can take the floor. Oh, I think we're having challenges. Ipfi, we can't.
They had their questions in the chat. Maybe I can just read it, and then once they're able
Okay.
to fix their mic, then they can come through.
All right.
So the question that if you posed was, to what extent can electricity generation derived from carbon abatement initiatives be aligned with the strategic objectives of the jet energy transition?
Interesting question. Anyone want to take that? Brett or Cindy, I can also come in on this one. But Brett, maybe let me try with you first.
Yeah, Shamini, thanks for that question. And we did try and engage with this a lot within our study. I mean, and there's actually a next question which is also linked to this one as to, can methane used for energy generation be compatible with the just transition? I think what we said is yes, the two are certainly not incompatible. There are opportunities for generation from an energy source that might otherwise just go into the atmosphere. So if the methane is released into the atmosphere, then it just remains as a global warming gas. So we can extract this energy, and then there might be the opportunities as well for new economic opportunities and perhaps some job creation. But I think, like we've said in response, I think, to Richard's point as well, is I don't think we must see this as a silver bullet. The energy generation opportunity, as we've said a number of times, is potentially very limited by the concentration of methane in the gases. So we can't say it's definitely an opportunity that we're going to be able to access. And also, we don't know how big an opportunity it would be. So I think we've got to guard very carefully against coal mine methane being a silver bullet in terms of the just energy transition. In fact, I think it's quite the opposite. And to talk to what you and Nikki said, I think it's part of an integrated package of addressing multiple opportunities with abandoned mines or mines that are going to come to the end of their lives. So I think we need to be a little bit conservative in the way we think of it as a just transition, great opportunity.
Absolutely, Brett. I mean, I think that's exactly what I was saying. There's all of these sort of benefits that one could accrue by aggregating this and looking at this more holistically than simply saying, okay, let's tackle this one area. We've got a number of issues that need to be tackled, and we can group them and look at a programmatic type activity. And you can maybe even link in agriculture and farming and all kinds of other things that go with that. Even production of different kinds of biofuels was even being looked at. So there's other ways that one could bridge this gap of return on investment, which is always needed to be able to get funding and to get the necessary scale to make these things viable. Anyone else want to add to that? I think it was a good question on the just transition side. Nikki, do you concur with what Brett has said? I think, a lot of what you've said already makes it challenging to just focus on this one thing. Anything to add?
Not on this question. There was another question that I see that Richard put into the chat.
Okay.
Which
go for it.
Yeah, so Richard's question was, how do the low levels of methane concentration in SA coal fields? Is there any credibility in proposals to utilize coal bed methane as primary energy resource? And I think that's a very interesting question. In operating coal mines, I'd probably say in the regions we're currently mining in, probably no. But there are coal bed methane resources. So we have one up near Lephalale. It's much deeper than current coal fields, and because of the geology there's methane trapped in that. And we're currently looking at how we can extract that methane, either to produce LNG or to use it for electricity production. So I think that there are opportunities, but those would be classified as gas resources rather than mineable coal. And I think that that is something that we need to look at as a country, given the importance that's been placed on gas as a transition fuel through the transition.
All right, thanks for that, Nikki. There's another question here that says, all details are visible that fossil fuel is the wrong way, I assume. With all these findings, how enough should particularly direct affected communities in their land where they say, how louder should the voice that fossil fuels, particularly coal mining, is a wrong path, so that simplicity, nature-based alternatives are recognized? We do not have a guarantee of well-being and future generations being harmfully affected. I'm gathering here that the question is rather about, if we start looking at coal bed methane, that we are then entrenching fossil fuels in the base. And this is not then opening up the path for other opportunities or alternatives like, nature-based solutions. That's what I'm gathering this question really asking about. I think for me, the thing that I want to maybe ask the panelists here, we're trying to tackle something whilst we have coal mining such a dominant part of the economy. We need to start looking at opportunities. We've got an IRP that still has coal in it. We need to have energy security. We need the lights on. We need to start industrializing again and getting, growth in this economy. We need coal to do that. We like it or not. We recognize there's challenges, but it is here, it's the resource we have. So how then do we make it cleaner and better for the environment? Are you all in agreement with that? Brett, this is quite one of those topical issues. Nikki, I see you off mute. Please jump in. I really want to start a conversation here.
Yeah, Shamini, I couldn't agree more. I think from an industrialization point of view, we need energy, and we're going to need every amount of energy that we can get. Yes, our coal-fired power stations are going to start retiring. And what are we going to replace those with? How, is our grid suitable for extensive rollout of renewables at this point? Probably not. And do we have the investment in that, in modernizing our grid to be able to support that? So I do think we're going to need other things. As you say, the IRP still has coal in it. It's got 6 gigawatts of gas-fired electricity by 2030. Where's that gas going to come from? And so I think, we need to be realistic about what resources we have as a country. And we need to focus on building the economy and through industrialization. And industrialization needs power.
Yep. And no one is saying we're stopping renewables or any of the other things around decarbonization. At this point, we need to do both. We need energy security and decarb. That's what's been coming through quite clearly, even from government. Brett, anything to add? Cindy, I want to pull you into the conversation. This is very much a government conversation as well. Please also feel free after Brett. But Brett, over to you.
Yeah, I'd like to add to the voice that says we need to rapidly decarbonize as quickly as possible, and I think that should be our primary agenda. So putting that line in the sand, I've got to agree with Shamini and Nikki. You can't turn off the coal power stations overnight. We could certainly, motivate for the investment that Nikki is talking to in the grid that would support renewables, but we certainly haven't seen in the past few years the investment in the grid that we need to take up this large-scale renewables that we would like to decarbonize our grid. And certainly, our power stations are running, many of them for the next 10, 20 years under current planning and under current viability situation. So then I agree with Shamini, we need to make it as clean as possible. And if management of coal mine methane is part of that package of opportunities to help us move to a low carbon economy, we need to support it. So I don't think people who see the management of coal mine methane as locking us into coal, I don't agree with that framing. I think that we have to transition, but we have to manage the methane as quickly as possible.
Absolutely, Brett. So well said. Cindy, anything to add? And then we can go to another hand that's up.
Yeah, I think a lot has been covered, but what I can add on my side is that the importance of community engagement and community awareness in terms of this issue, because if you look at the demand side in the energy sector, some of this is influenced by what we do in our homes. So some of the changes in terms of energy efficiency needs to happen at ground roots level, and that requires awareness and education of the community.
Thanks for that, Cindy. Very important point about making sure we have pulling all the levers, because it's not just a focus in one area. Thanks for that, Cindy. All right, so we've got Becky. Becky, are you able to take the floor? Can we hear you?
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you very
All
much, and good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. Thanks.
I just want to get a sense as to what responsibility or a portion of that responsibility do the industry take. I mean, they invest in terms of these mines. They know the risk that comes out of it, and their intention really is to make money, and they do make profit. But to what an extent are they taking the responsibility of this negative things that comes out of these things? It seems to me that even the opportunities that we're talking about are not really the responsibility that lies, or opportunity that lies with the mining sector. It seems to say somebody else may want to make business out of this methane, but the mining industry's responsibility seems to me just goes to the question of making the mine safe. Am I reading correct that they take a lesser responsibility in trying to find a solution?
No, I think, Becky, no, that's completely the opposite. I mean, the fact that we have one of the big mining companies in this panel, this is something that is very much taken as an ownership and accountability. Yes, you have to have a coordinated effort. And you need a number of stakeholders involved, including the government stakeholder, because they're the regulator. But I think just showing you here that some of the monitoring and the emission factors, the Coltech report was commissioned by the companies themselves, because we realized there was a big issue here. And I'm speaking as the Minerals Council. I represent the mining houses here. I can tell you this is very much part of our climate change positions, our mitigation plans. But I want to hear directly from one of the mining houses. Let me hand to Nikki, because I mean, you leading the charge here in some of these projects from 10, 15 years ago, right? This is not something we've started now, but Nikki?
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely not something that we think is anybody else's responsibility. It's the reason we tried the trial, even though we knew the gas contents were probably too low. There was significant investment that went into that project. We actually tried to register it as a CDM project because the carbon credits would have made it viable, but it just, because of the low gas content, it just, we couldn't keep it going. And I think also, now with the coal mine, the continuous methane monitoring, I mean, that comes at a significant cost. We want accurate data on what's actually happening. And I think until we've got that, it becomes difficult to say, well, what we can and can't do. Certainly at this point, the gas concentrations are too low. And we're not trying to fob it off. We still pay tax on those concentrations. And so I think, there's still incentive for companies to try to do something about that methane if there was a possibility to do something. And so, I think we take a broad view to it. And if there's nothing we can do to mitigate the methane, then we try as hard as we can to mitigate our emissions in other areas through, whether it's through implementation of renewable energy or, efficiency, whatever the case may be. And so we certainly don't think that, we're not trying to put our responsibility onto anybody else. But I think a collaborative effort with industry, and there certainly is room for research to look at in more depth, what other technologies are available. I see one of the participants has mentioned wet scrubbers or something. And absolutely, I mean, I think that the universities play a big role in this as well. If there are technologies that we can trial safely, then I think we should do that. And Coltech is a great vehicle to do that through.
Absolutely. That brings us to a question that I just saw, which I thought would be quite apt for us to go through. We've got a PhD candidate in industrial engineering at the University of Pretoria, Rubeshan, who asks, how does the PCC and the different mining stakeholders view the use of AI in fixing the coal mine methane issue? Are there any planned projects in this regard? I'm not sure, but does anyone have any sort of understanding on AI utilization? There might be something on process management, but I think that's a little bit far ahead, right, Nikki?
Not that I know of, not that I'm
Yeah.
aware of. I think it's a great idea. I think we should use the tools that are available.
Definitely an opportunity for research, right, Brett?
Yeah, absolutely. I also haven't heard of anything, and it would be very interesting to explore it further.
Yeah.
Shamini, can I actually maybe just respond to the previous question, just to add to what
Yes.
Nikki said? I think perhaps where there is a data gap, but without oversight of the reporting data, is from the junior miners. And I don't know if anybody on the call has any idea of the extent to which junior miners are reporting and have a sense of their scale of contribution to the challenge. So I very much acknowledge the large miners are really putting in the efforts to measure and to look at opportunities for mitigation. I think that's a big gap, in addition to obviously the abandoned mines, but they're, of course, assigning responsibility is challenging.
Thanks for that, Brett. And I think it's an important issue. And I think that's where the Minerals Council also has a role to play. It's definitely something that we can bring up and start looking at how we get more data into the system. Because like I said, once you know your baseline, you can actually start thinking about what to do with it. But if you don't have all of the sources, it makes then the mitigation side so much more difficult. So absolutely, and happy to take that forward. I mean, we don't have anyone here or a hand up. Let me just check to make sure that we don't have a hand up.
We do have a hand up from...
No, from the junior miners is what I'm asking.
Okay, sorry. Okay.
Yeah. No, so no one that actually would be able to respond to that directly. All right, so we've got a hand from Mitchell again. So maybe we can take that, and then I'd like to start moving into the way forward discussion. But Mitchell? You're on mute still? Yeah, there we
Thank
go.
you very much, Mr. Anil Mnambo, Grassroots Proclamation Action. Thank you very much. First with Brett, I like the title of your slide, the climate blind spot. So on the blind spots, I'm not sure if you cover this, on the carbon tax. Is there any way we can get, the mines, to account so that there's actionable plans taking place in the carbon tax part? And then to Nikki, the carbon capture storage, how much work have you put into that, just to get an idea of this progress in capturing the methane, which is very dangerous, as colleagues have mentioned, as you have all the mines that are around communities which are getting very, very much affected. And any plans on your environmental social safeguards as well? Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. I think we've got a few people sitting with Michelle, so that's good. No problem with that. But Brett, maybe let's start with you on the carbon tax one, and then we can move to Nikki.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and it also relates to a question in the chat about polluter pays. I mean, Nikki's already mentioned that the mining houses are paying carbon tax on methane emissions, so it's required to be reported, and it is taxed, so it's there.
Yeah, thanks for that clarity, Brett. Nikki, the remainder of the question.
Sorry, I battled to hear the question clearly. My sound was a bit bad.
Michelle, do you want to maybe just repeat the second half? I also struggled a little bit to hear you.
Otherwise, Shamini, I'm most happy to give my interpretation of it, and then maybe Nikki can
Can you hear me now?
Maybe I can just it's
Can
Errol.
you
can come in.
Yeah. I was asking regarding the carbon capture storage, just to get an idea how much work have you put into it, and what have been the any positive outcomes on that? Yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay.
And then lastly, on the safeguards, environmental social safeguards that you've put in place. Thank you very much.
Okay. Safety side of things. Okay. Nikki, over to you.
Okay, so from a carbon capture and storage perspective, there is a pilot project happening in South Africa. It's going to be near Leandra, and I think that they're quite close to starting to drill the initial test injection well. From a Thungela perspective, we are involved a lot more in sort of international organizations, things like the Low Emissions Technology Australia and things. China's doing a lot of work. So carbon capture and storage is actually the deployment of carbon capture and storage is accelerating rapidly. I'm not going to go into too much detail right now, but I think the project in South Africa has good potential for application, specific applications on high felt or near industry, hard to abate industries. Whether it'll work for power stations, I'm not sure. I don't know if the techno-economic feasibility is there, but I think for bespoke industrial applications, it's very much an option if the geology is suitable. And then from a safeguard, social safeguards perspective, it's safety, at our Thungela, safety is sort of at the forefront of everything we do, whether it's for our own employees, contractors, communities, etc. So, I have seen that there have been some comments around dust and inhalables, and certainly that is an issue. The new 2035 targets have reduced the limits of exposures, and we've made really good progress in limiting the exposure of employees and contractors to inhalable, harmful inhalable particulates. This is why the ventilation systems are so important. Methane, from a methane perspective, because our concentrations are very low, that is less of a risk at the moment than other particulates that you get underground. But yeah, there's a lot of work in place to mitigate those, and dust and things as well. So I think a lot of different separate issues, but all of those we are working on all of those, and it's all in our ESG report.
And part of a regulated system, right? These are not things that we do in a vacuum and it's inconsistently applied. There's health standards, occupational exposure limits. These all have to be maintained. So, it talks to your license to operate. So we've got to have PPE in place. You've got to have all of the different safeguards for human health, etc., in place. Otherwise, workers aren't allowed onto site. These are some of the things that are being implemented by the mining houses. Just on CCS, I mean, that particular question very related to a much more higher concentration of carbon, right? CO2, not necessarily for the methane emissions that we're talking about here. And there's lots of work that's ongoing. I mean, Coltech, you heard that mentioned earlier on. They're also doing lots of studies on this. What would clean coal technologies look like? CCS is part of that basket. You've got the CCS Center that's looking at this from the council side. So there's that test injection, I think, is imminent. They're just waiting for some funding. And then they're going to look at that, and we're going to have some reports around feasibility, how much you can put in the ground, etc. So very eager to see what that looks like as well over the next year or two. So that's where we stand on that. I think now that we are sort of at the halfway mark of our discussion, one of the big questions that we had when we started this webinar is, what should we do? Where should the immediate priorities be? The PCC has a role to play. What should our role be in this space? I mean, just from what I've been gathering, there's a real data issue here around getting the data and the baseline right. But I mean, Nikki, you mentioned the capital expenditure and the cost is very high. So we need some sort of funding mechanism around this as well. How do we get some institutions around this to put some money to start looking at the baseline? Is this a good summing up of where the PCC could play a role around how we get the data side right? I want to bring Cindy into the conversation. So maybe, Cindy, can we start with you? Do you see this as the first step for us?
Thanks, Shamini. Yes, I think this is a very critical step in ensuring that the mitigation efforts within the sector are based on credible data. And this is something that we recognize as government as well in the inventory, that we need to ensure that there's continuous improvement of the data that we are using, so that we are using data that is informing the baseline, as you have indicated, and in terms of what needs to be done in the future. I mean, this is something where the PCC can play a role in ensuring that we improve the data for this sector.
Thanks for that, Cindy. Can I go to Nikki and then we take Brett on this?
Thanks, Shamini. I definitely think it's an area that the PCC could play a role. Certainly, I mean, I know that there's been a lot of the satellite data that's been used, and I know that there's a lot of limitations associated with that. But I think, funding towards enhancing that, looking, in more granular detail and doing ground truthing, that's I think something that could definitely help. And then, as you mentioned, funding some of these systems. I think, these systems are widely available in Australia, in the US, etc. The fact that they're not available here, I think, is it's very limiting for industry, and it makes it very difficult for us to try and implement these things. We're swimming upstream a little bit trying to implement them. So, to be able to enable more of those technologies and develop the skills to roll them out here as well, I think would be very helpful.
Thanks for that, Nikki. Brett?
Yeah, I'd like to support what both Cindy and Nikki have said. And actually, I'd like to acknowledge the people who sponsored our report, the Global Methane Hub, have already approached us to talk about this particular issue and to see if there's a way that this work can be funded. And we've said that, what it really requires is it requires collaboration across the different stakeholders. So it needs to be a joint effort, hopefully led by the PCC, but with researchers, with industry, with all stakeholders who have an interest in it, to try and consultants who are working in the satellite monitoring, to try and really get on top of the data question, because we can't move forward without understanding any of this. The mitigation opportunities, the just energy transition opportunities, and the scale of it. Somebody asked in the questions, how much money do we need for this? And it's impossible to know that until we have a sense of the data. So I support very much this conversation, and like to acknowledge that we are already progressing in terms of trying to move forward on this question.
Brett, I mean, what I'm hearing you say is possibly the need for a small task team, a working group of some kind. We need to put our heads together to think, what can we do? How do we do it? And who can fund this? And where's the best place to start looking? I mean, abandoned mines, very difficult. I mean, how are we going to start doing that? You need to first find a baseline of those mines to say which ones are plausible to actually go out there and do something about. So there's that whole process as well. I know I'm going to put someone on the spot here, but I see Alan and I'm seeing his name there, and he's done so much of work in this space. We do have time. Alan, anything to add to what we've said? I mean, you've been involved in a lot of the work previously. If you don't want to take the floor, you're most welcome not to, but I thought, let me just see if there's anything you want to add.
Yes, good morning, or good afternoon now. Thanks for that. Yeah. There's been a lot of talk about data and baselines and reliability and stuff like that. The numbers that we're using at the moment, the IPCC numbers that were referenced earlier, and I think by Nikki, and that was from that Coltech work that was done. There was two sets of Coltech work, and the IPCC numbers were developed from the first one through the Coltech research and under guidance at the time of Prof. Philip Lloyd, who was IPCC representative at that time from South Africa. So that was the connection with IPCC. And all that work is extensively reviewed, peer-reviewed this side. It's peer-reviewed publications. It's reviewed within the IPCC itself. So those original baseline numbers were good. The ones that are still being used as our tier 2 numbers.
Yeah.
Then that work was repeated about 5 or 6 years later, just to see. And we got more or less the same numbers in terms of total emissions of methane from underground mines. And we did more extensive work on surface mines, which was very difficult at that stage. So the numbers as they were, the IPCC database numbers, the emission factors database for South Africa, were reliable and good at that time. Now, Nikki showed results that we keep from regular measurements on all the mines, the coal mines, essentially every coal mine in the country. But that doesn't mean we've got equal numbers of measurements for every coal mine in the country. So there is potential for variation. The big mining companies tend to take measurements in their producing areas, the production sections, once or twice a year. The small mining operations once a year, maybe once every 2 years, or even once every 3 years. So there is a regularity in some of that data. But we do have thousands of individual results of in-seam gas contents. And we're fairly happy that we get consistent results and that these are reliable results. And these are taken underground. These samples are from underground samples in producing coal mines. We've done extensive work over the last 6 months or so, where we've been taking samples in a high felt area from surface drill cores, where you drill into the virgin coal seam ahead of mining. And we're getting fairly similar results from those mines from virgin seam conditions as we get from production areas. So we're quite happy those numbers are good. But what we have seen over the period since the Coltech work was done, and Nikki showed it in that graph, that our average across all the mines is a low seam gas content of 0.2 cubic meters a ton. And at the time of the Coltech work, we were running at about 0.4 cubic meters a ton, I think, if I remember correctly. So in terms of the models that were developed at the time with Coltech, they were developed on higher seam gas content mines. And there was and Nikki said as well, they know that their mine emissions are probably lower than using those tier 2 calculations. And I've said even right back at the time that you can't really apply those tier 2 models sort of willy-nilly to very low seam gas content mines who are paying then effectively too much tax, and high seam content mines who are paying too little tax. In terms of a tax sort of way of looking at it. So we're probably at the stage, and I think you're at that stage in your presentation now, in your seminar, of where do we go? What needs to be done? There was a proposal at the time from Coltech all those many years ago that they would re-look at it every 5 years, but in reality, that didn't happen. So I think we're at a stage where we probably need to go back, either as an industry and certainly including other bodies and academia, and look at those models and say, where are we at in terms, because it takes a lot of work to get IPCC approval and to change those numbers into the emission factors database. So we're probably 2 years work away if we started now from being able to convince the IPCC that we want to reduce our numbers, if that's what we want to do. Because at the time when I started that Coltech research work, there was no suggestion that we should be looking to get nice low numbers for the coal mining industry. That was never, ever suggested. The coal mines paid for it, the industry paid for that work. And the objective was to measure and identify the numbers. And that's what was done. Our numbers are relatively low compared to other countries, simply because our coal seam gas contents are relatively low. We mine at shallow depths, and Nikki mentioned it earlier. We mine at shallow depths, and the significant thing that affects our coal seam gas contents is the depth of mining, because that's what creates the pressure that holds the gas inside the coal seams. So the deeper you go, the higher the pressure on the coal seam, and that keeps the gas in it. So we mine relatively shallow. We don't have confining pressure on top of our coal seams. So we have relatively low seam gas contents. And there was also a lot of discussion about mitigation and stuff like that. And it is a difficult situation for us because we have relatively low seam gas contents. To compare ourselves with Australians or the US mines or Eastern European mines, which have significantly higher gas contents. And you could literally say if they go and drill a hole, the gas will come out. If we go and drill a hole, no gas comes out. In terms of being able to drain methane and use it effectively. I think there is possibilities for localized use of methane if we can identify certain areas. And Nikki also mentioned the potential in the Lepalale area of deeper coal seams and stuff like that.
Yeah.
There's localized areas certainly in KZN and in high fill areas, but localized, where and there's been discussion of community involvement, where there might be small scale applications for methane drained methane, coal bed methane. But on a national scale, it's going to be difficult. But I have always considered that it might be worth looking at small scale. There are systems, even literally almost, I think, sort of trailer or truck mounting systems that can be mobile and can move around, even on relatively short-lived coal bed methane areas.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Alan. Very interesting, and I think you've summed it up really, really well. I think we need a working group. We need to refresh this work. It is now time. We're hearing that the baseline needs to be looked at, perhaps even looking at the different mines in terms of what those concentrations are like. Like you said, there might be some discrepancies. Some are underpaying, some are overpaying, that kind of thing. It might be worthwhile to look at this. And there are definitely opportunities. And I like the idea of bringing in small scale, just transition, employment opportunities, poverty alleviation. I mean, the types of projects can tackle that. And the fact that it can be mobile is something to definitely look at. But I think the first step is let's get the baseline right. Let's get a working group together. And I think many of the questions that have been asked are now related to how do people get involved? How do we have an inclusive process? This will be done as part of the PCC's mandate. I mean, these kinds of things are often consulted with when we get to project level. You have to speak to the communities. You have to speak to the relevant stakeholders. I think the first step is let the experts sit around the table and work out what type of a study is going to be needed. How do we actually get to that detailed level of granularity, as detailed as one can get based on the options and data we have available? But I think that's a good way to segue into a sort of last one word summing up from each of you, not more than 30 seconds as the panel. And then I want to hand over to Lebo to just take us through the closing. Let's start with you, Nikki. I can see a smile on your face. You probably want to say something.
No, I think it's been a really interesting conversation. I fully agree. I think, a working group as a starting point on a way to go forward, and re-looking at the baseline, re-looking at data and how we start to sort of bring in the smaller mining companies together with the bigger ones and seeing how we can manage all of this sort of in a fair and accurate way. So thank you. It's been a great discussion.
Thanks, Nikki. Brett?
Thanks, Shamini. Yeah, I mean, I support what Nikki says. I think it's great that there's the momentum to take this topic forward. I think it's critical, and I think kind of a working group with all of the stakeholders is important. And then, I think it's a very difficult space to manage expectations about what is and isn't doable. And we've heard that repeatedly said. We would all love to get rid of all the coal mine methane, but there are practicalities around it. And we would all love to have perfect information, but we don't. So we need to work towards kind of filling the gaps and making things happen, and then also tie into the community needs and the on-the-ground needs, around the coal mines, I think. So, thank you for the participation and the opportunity.
Thank you, Brett. Thanks for the pragmatism and the sort of reality check, because I think that's important to manage these expectations. We can't tackle everything, and we might have to acknowledge what those are. Cindy, over to you. Really 30 seconds, and then I can hand to Lebo. I can see her patiently waiting.
Thank you, Shamini. I think it has been a great conversation, and as the department, I think we're looking forward for the setting up of the working group, because there's a term that we usually used in equality before I came into climate change, that you cannot manage what you do not know. And we need to improve the data going forward so that the mitigation strategies are aligned with what is actually happening in the ground.
Thank you so much, Cindy. Lebo, over to you. And I think we've given you some work.
I love that. Setting up a conversation, and instead of people taking the work for it, they kind of give it back to me. So that's awesome. Let me just say a huge thank you to the participants here today for really engaging in a clearly a complex conversation around coal mine methane abatement. Just safe to say, even in the PCC, when we've been thinking about the conversation, we've just been trying to understand where best are our efforts required so that we can drive impact, particularly within the subject matter. So just to say that convening this discussion has really channeled us in the right direction. A task team is clearly needed, and given the fact that the PCC's mandate is quite nicely around our coordination and convening power role, we're definitely keen to move in that direction. I like the comments that have come up around sort of the need for data, as well as for the coordination of that particular of particular data sets, which we take on as something that needs to be prioritized. I think there were really nice punchy lines around, you can't fund without a data basis, and you can't identify what the investment requirement is if you don't understand what exactly you're grappling with in terms of actual data sets, and you can't plan for what you don't know. So I think that's definitely something that we need to take on board. And I think from the side of the DFFE as well, the question has come up around the need for publicly available data. There's also something that definitely needs to be taken forward. And another nice element around, just how to streamline policy so that there's limited fragmentation of policy, especially when it comes to these specific issues. So those are definitely things that we'd like to take on board. I like the element of the need for localized interventions. I must say, Nikki, when you gave your presentation, I was really worried. I thought, oh my gosh, what then would be our opportunity here? But I see the need for localized interventions and small scale projects that definitely pull through in terms of just transition opportunities, especially in coal bed methane areas. So with that said, colleagues, please allow me to say a very huge thank you to the facilitator for the day, Shamini. Thanks for agreeing to facilitate the session for us, and always availing yourself for these conversations. Thank you, Ms. Cindy Siwe from the DFFE. Prof. Brett, thanks for participating, as well as Nikki from Tungela, as well as the representative from the Global Methane Hub. We also noted that our newly appointed Commissioner Errol was on the line today and made contributions. Thank you for participating. It was also nice to hear my former boss on the line, the former General Secretary of COSATU, Mr. Begin Jalin. It was really great to hear your inputs as well. So colleagues, thanks for joining us. Thanks for participating in the session. We've definitely got work to do as the PCC, and we will be having these conversations regularly to keep you updated on the work program of the PCC with regards to coal mine methane abatement. Thank you, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Level. Just to note one thing, there's a number of questions still in the chat. Just a request, I think, to the panelists, please, can you still try and see if we can answer that and we can get it out to the audience. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye. Thanks, Level.
Bye.
Thank you.